I recently made a video about Charles Manson's musical career and the strange relationship his family had to the musical scene of the time. Throughout my research for that video, I kept coming across a character from the Manson family that was just as fascinating as Manson himself. From her strange role within the family to her actions while Manson was incarcerated, she kept popping up in every interesting story about the Manson family. This is the story of Lynette Fromme, a Manson family member that went on to become the first woman to attempt to assassinate a US president. Lynette Fromme was born in 1948 in Santa Monica. As a child, she performed in the famous dance group the Westchester Lariats, and went on to tour Europe and the US with them in the 50s. She performed at the White House and the Lawrence Welk talk show with the group. In 1963, her and her family moved to Redondo Beach, which is when she started abusing drugs and alcohol. Both her and her father had strong personalities and clashed constantly, which is why in 1966, after graduating high school, Lynette decided to move out of the family home. A short while later, her parents convinced her to move back in. She started attending the El Camino College in 1967. But this didn't last long. After another argument with her father, she was kicked out again in 19, becoming officially homeless. She decided to try to stay with her boyfriend, but after going to his house, she found out that he wasn't home. She decided to spend the day bumming around the city, waiting for him to return. She ended up at a bus stop, sitting on the curb and watching buses go past. While Lynette was sitting on the curb in Venice Beach, Charles Manson got off one of the buses. He just arrived to LA to meet Gary Stromberg, one of the music producers that was supposed to record his music. Upon seeing Lynette, he said, "Your parents threw you out, didn't they?" Lynette said that she can handle herself, but later recalled that this is when she realized that Charles Manson was psychic. Manson walked off, but Lynette immediately picked up her belongings and decided to follow him. He spoke to her for a while about his philosophical and religious views. She found these appealing and immediately agreed to travel with Manson. Her and Manson hung out around LA for a few days while they waited for Stromberg to return Manson's calls. When that didn't happen, she traveled to San Francisco with Manson and moved in with Mary Brunner, officially becoming the second member of the so-called Manson family. The three started living nomadically, traveling around the coast in a van. They used Mary Brunner's apartment as their headquarters for Charlie's parole officer, but spent way more time together out on the open road. Manson kept having more and more people join his family, and the bus soon became too crowded. They started looking for a place to settle down in, which is when they discovered Spahn Ranch. The ranch was owned by a man called George Spahn, a man in his 80s that was almost completely blind and never ventured far out of his porch. He was completely unaware as to what was happening on the rest of his ranch. Manson approached him and asked if he and 4 other people could stay at his ranch. The real number at the time was around 20. He offered to have some of his girls cook and clean for George in return for letting them stay there. Spahn was clearly attracted to the women, so their role became giving him constant attention to keep him oblivious to what Charles Manson was doing with his ranch. He was the most attracted to Lynette Fromme, and she soon became his primary caretaker, spending all of her time with George. She started giving him sexual favors. He nicknamed her Squeaky for the sound she made when he ran his hands up her thighs. This nickname stuck, and is what she is known by to this day. Lynette's primary role, which she was good at, was keeping George pacified, letting the family stay on his ranch forever. She also acted as Manson's informant, keeping him up to date with how much George knew about Manson's activities and how he felt about his actions. But even Lynette's work couldn't keep them on the farm forever. When Manson started bringing stolen cars to the ranch and dealing drugs out of the property, George became more and more unhappy with the family staying there. He eventually got tired of them and kicked them out of the property. Lynette Fromme was not involved in the Tate LaBianca murders that eventually put the family on trial. In support, her and a few other family members decided to sit outside the courthouse all day long while the trial was happening. They preached Manson's philosophy to anyone that would listen, and frequently gave interviews to the media. When Manson carved an X into his forehead, they all did the same, to show that they had X'd themselves out of society. Lynette refused to testify in court, and attempted to get other witnesses to not testify either. One of these was Barbara Hoyt, a member of the family who left after she found out about the murders and agreed to be the state's witness in the trial. Lynette and the remaining members hatched a plan to take Hoyt to Hawaii and kill her there. Ruth Ann Morehouse managed to convince Barbara to come on a fully paid trip to Hawaii with her. In Honolulu, she fed her a hamburger laced with 10 doses of LSD. They left her in Hawaii hoping that she would die there. Unbeknownst to them, she was hospitalized and survived the encounter. All of the people involved were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Later, that was downgraded to conspiracy to dissuade a witness from testifying. All of the people involved got 90 days of jail time, with Lynette getting an additional 90 days for refusing to testify herself. While Manson was in prison, Lynette took more of a leadership role within the family. She was in charge of communication, keeping all of the imprisoned Manson family members in touch with each other. She was also in charge of following through with any deals Manson made before he was put in prison. One of these was a deal with the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1972, Lynette traveled to Stockton with 2 other Manson family members and 2 members of the Aryan Brotherhood. They met James and Lauren Willett there, as James was threatening to tell the police about the robberies the Aryan Brotherhood were involved in. The group made James dig his own grave, shot him, decapitated him, and buried him. On the 11th of November, the police were called and told that James's car was parked at a different address. They raided the house and found 2 Manson family members and 2 members of the Aryan Brotherhood. Lynette was not home. They found guns, ammo, and cannabis stashed throughout the house. In the basement, they found freshly dug dirt, which is where Lauren was shot and buried. James's body was found buried 100 miles away because one of his hands was sticking out of the dirt. While the police were still at the address, Lynette called the house and asked to be picked up. The police traced the call to a payphone and did just that. She was arrested along with the rest of the group. However, even though Lynette traveled to Stockton with the group and was staying with them, the police couldn't find any evidence that she was actually involved in the murder. Lynette was released after 2.5 months in custody. All 4 of the people she traveled and stayed with were arrested, charged with murder, and imprisoned. After being released from custody, Lynette moved to Sacramento with Sandra Good. Manson was recently transferred to the nearby Folsom prison, and the 2 wanted to stay close to Manson. Lynette and Sandra changed their names and appearance to symbolize their devotion to Manson. Lynette started going by Red, a nickname that Charlie had given her due to her red hair and the connection he saw between her and the California redwoods. Sandra started going by Blue because of her blue eyes and the connection to the ocean. The 2 started wearing hands-on blue and red robes everywhere they went. In 1973, while living at the apartment, Lynette wrote a 600-page book titled Reflection, all about her experience living with Charles Manson. However, she wouldn't end up releasing the book until 2018, as it was deemed too incriminating. Charles Manson became a lot more environmentalist in prison. He developed a new philosophy he called ATWA, standing for Air, Trees, Water, and Animals. Obviously, Lynette followed suit and became very committed to the environmentalist cause. In the 70s, smog and air pollution was becoming much worse in California. It started reaching rural areas and the California redwoods that Red felt so personally connected to. However, the current president, Gerald was very anti-environmentalist and wanted to repeal the 1963 Clean Air Act. He became symbolic of the political and corporate elite who cared little for nature and were willing to destroy anything for power and profit. So Lynette decided to assassinate Ford for clean air, healthy water, and respect for creatures and creation. She got an M1911 pistol, 25 rounds, and a magazine from Zeke. Zeke was an elderly man who was Lynette's sugar daddy. He had already given her a lot of money and even purchased her a new car. He started teaching her how to use her new firearm, unaware of what she wanted to use it for. On the 5th of September 1975, Gerald Ford was giving a speech at the Senator Hotel. He left and began a 150-meter walk to the state capitol, where he was due to meet Governor Jerry Brown. A large crowd had gathered around him, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the president and shake his hand. Near the front of the crowd was Lynette Fromme, in her red robe and with a pistol strapped to her leg under her dress with a makeshift holster. She patiently waited for Ford to approach. When he was about 60 centimeters away, she pulled the gun out and aimed it at the president. However, the gun didn't go off. While there were bullets in the gun, there was no round in the chamber. The crowd around her heard a metallic click and soon saw the pistol in her hand. The Secret Service wrestled her to the ground and dragged her away. While she was being dragged away, she kept shouting "it didn't go off" to the nearby news cameras. During the trial, she said that she never had the intention of killing Ford and knew that there was no round in the chamber. While the prosecution argued that she simply didn't know that she needed to pull the slide back to chamber a round, there are photos of Lynette using firearms at Spahn Ranch, and it was discovered during the trial that she was taking regular shooting lessons at a firing range. She said that she wanted to show that anybody can kill anyone. In court, she kept rambling about the redwood forests and the need to protect nature. She even requested that Charles Manson be a witness because he could explain the need for conservation better. This motion was obviously denied. She ended her statement by saying, "The gun is pointed, and whether it goes off is up to you all." Sandra Good was clearly supportive of Lynette's assassination attempt. On the day of Fromme's arrest, reporters rushed to her apartment and interviewed Sandra Good. She told them that the International People's Court of Retribution was ready to bring death to corporate leaders and politicians. She said, quote, "Thousands of people will be moving through bedrooms with butcher's knives. Those people who are killing our earth deserve to die." Lynette's side argued for an assault conviction rather than attempted murder, as she never actually intended to kill the president. But when the prosecutors demanded a severe punishment because she was, quote, "full of hate and violence," Lynette responded by throwing an apple at the prosecutor's head and knocking off his glasses. This did not help change their minds at all. She was made an example of and convicted for attempted murder, granting her a life in prison. With that, Lynette became the first woman to ever attempt to assassinate a US president. The only other female presidential assassin came only 17 days later, when an unrelated woman tried to kill Ford for reasons separate from Lynette's. In prison, Lynette remained dedicated to Charles Manson. In 1987, she escaped from prison after hearing that Charles had cancer. She roamed the West Virginia mountains for about 40 hours, attempting to get close to him again. She was caught shortly after and imprisoned again. In 2009, she was finally released on parole after serving nearly 34 years of her sentence. Gerald Ford was already dead for almost 3 years by that point. Now free, she moved to Marcy, New York with her boyfriend, a fan who contacted her while she was incarcerated. She lives there to this day, with her neighbors describing her as friendly, polite, and adverse to conflict and drama. Everyone described Lynette as having a religious devotion to Charles Manson, and the two kept in regular contact. She was one of only 2 members to never renounce him, in 2019 even saying that she is still in love with him. Her role in the family was very subservient, and consisted of only doing what Charlie told her to do. The prosecution could never prove that Manson gave the order to kill the president, but all of them thought that was the case and even openly spoke about it in interviews. Other members of the family described her as not very smart, and even they suspected that someone else came up with the plan. To this day, it is still uncertain if Manson ever directly ordered Fromme to kill the president.